Welcome back. Today in our Sunday Spotlight, the Hartford Whalers may have played their final game in Hartford more than 25 years ago, but the team is very much alive in the hearts and minds of many of its Connecticut fans. There's a new book out about the team written by a man who grew up in Connecticut as a diehard Whalers fan. It's called Bleeding Green, A History of the Hartford Whalers. Author Christopher Price is here joining us now. Chris, thank you so much. I have the book. I told you before we began. I read it and thought it was great. I was pretty young while the Whalers were still playing here, but you grew up as a Connecticut kid rooting on the Whale, right?
I really did. I grew up in Farmington and Suffield, and I lived and died with them. One of the interesting things was, as a lot of people know, Connecticut was kind of divided up before it became UConn basketball became the all-consuming sporting monolith that it was now. You had to have, you were either a Boston fan or a New York fan. You were either a Bruins fan or a Rangers fan, Celtics or Knicks. There was no real sporting identity to call your own until the Whalers came along. It was a very exciting time, and it really kind of hit me on a bunch of levels. This was my team. These were my guys, and I really fell hard for them.
Now, when you were a fan of the team, and I remember going to games at the Civic Center, you would go to the Whalers shop there. You'd walk through the big whale, and you'd go in. They had trouble then keeping merchandise in stock, you say in your book. And I know now the merchandise continues to just sell like crazy. So what is it about that? You had an anecdote in your book. Kevin Dineen was in Switzerland, and he saw someone wearing a Whalers sweater, right?
Yeah, I love that story. And that really goes back to the song Brass Bonanza. He said, he saw a guy from across the restaurant. They were in Switzerland. He saw a guy across the restaurant. He went over to say hi. They both recognized each other. And it was very clear that this guy didn't speak a lick of English, but he started humming Brass Bonanza, and they both had a laugh. And Kevin said, you don't need a translator when it comes to Brass Bonanza, but it's the song, it's the logo. And I think a lot of it is still rooted in the sense of community, because this team, and the former owner Howard Baldwin used the great analogy, the Whalers were like the Green Bay Packers of hockey. It was a very small market community. People were very tight. People loved the team. You could see them down at the corner store. If you're going down to Big Y, you could see Dave Tippett down there. They were out in the community. They were doing charity events. They were very much a part of the Connecticut community, and that imprint still sticks with a lot of people today.
And it may just be because I would have been so young when this happened, but one of the things that I found most interesting in the book was about the very, very early WHA years and Howard Baldwin. I interviewed Howard probably in 2007 or 8 at one point when they were going to redo the Civic Center, or the XL Center now. And even then he had huge ideas. He really was exaggerating, almost lying. I mean, this thing was on a shoestring beyond shoestrings, and somehow he made it work.
Yeah, he really did. You can't write the history of the Whalers and not put Howard Baldwin in the first paragraph. This is a guy who, by sheer will and determination, made the whole thing work, even when we were talking about, the thousands of dollars as opposed to the millions of dollars that it would become. Howard Baldwin was the guy who got the whole thing together, saw the team and the WHA as a whole through some very difficult times. When the Civic Center roof collapsed, there was no guarantee that the Whalers or the WHA would survive that process. He was the one who pulled everyone together. He was the one who made the thing work, and he was the one who brought the team, really in the WHA as a whole, into the NHL with a merger in the late 1970s.
Of course, then it didn't work out. In the 90s, things went south. And you mentioned, I think in your first answer, something about the UConn, love for UConn and how that became the dominant sport. You have a great anecdote in here as well. Hartford people from the 90s will know this and appreciate it. Brendan Shanahan, he's an all-star. He's on the team. He's the big name on the Whalers. He goes down, I guess, to Allen Street to coaches, to the sports bar. He forgets his ID, and they won't let him in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that really, for Brendan, and Brendan's case was separate, I think, because he really, ultimately, I don't think he wanted to be in Hartford. But I think that really illustrates for a lot of people just how difficult a situation the Whalers were put into in the 1990s here. Because, again, UConn basketball just absolutely eclipsed everything, including the National Hockey League here locally. And that's not to say that, they were upset or anything, but it was a tough go. And the Whalers as a team picked the absolute worst possible time to backslide into mediocrity, because it became a point with advertisers and with people, you want to be associated with a winner. And so the idea of putting your advertising dollars behind UConn basketball as opposed to Hartford Whalers hockey, that became very popular at the time, and things started to kind of backslide. It wasn't the only reason they ended up moving out of town, but that was part of the conversation.
Well, and you quoted him at the time as saying, my face is on your menu and you won't let me in. But then I guess as he was leaving, he said, this isn't going to work out. And I know he meant about himself, but I thought, geez, if that's not an analogy to what happened. So I want to ask you this. We only have a couple minutes left. Is there ever going to be professional hockey in Hartford again?
I think it's going to be a tough sell. I really do. I don't think there's going to be professional hockey in Hartford until you get a new building. And I don't know about the financial viability right now of putting a new building in downtown Hartford. The one thing I always think of, the two things I always think of, first of all, you don't need to have hockey in Hartford to call them the Hartford Whalers. The San Francisco 49ers are the San Francisco 49ers, but they play 60 miles outside of San Francisco. So the idea of putting it somewhere in Connecticut would still work. My theory is you partner with Mohegan Sun, you partner with Foxwoods, you get them to build you a brand new stadium. So I think the other thing too, it's always going to be difficult. But I talked to the people in Seattle about losing the Sonics. And the one thing they told me was always keep fighting, because you never know when a hedge fund billionaire is waiting around the corner who grew up as a Whalers fan, who wants to make it his life's goal to bring hockey back to the state of Connecticut, professional hockey, NHL hockey back to the state of Connecticut. So really, those are the two biggest takeaways that I had from talking to people, that, look, it's not going to get done without a new building, but you never can give up hope.
Well, listen, you're talking to a Mets fan, so I know about billionaires who love teams. I got one owning my franchise right now. So you said in the very beginning of the book, this is a hockey book the way Field of Dreams is a baseball movie. You got 10 seconds left. Who should buy this book as a Christmas present?
Everyone who grew up as a Whalers fan, and everyone who can appreciate the nostalgic aspect of a team and a town and a love story between that community, within that community, and it having just kind of ripped away, but still being able to appreciate those great moments, those wonderful moments that the team, the town, everyone enjoyed along the way.
Well, we are out of time. Hopefully people will buy the book. Again, it's called Bleeding Green, A History of the Hartford Whalers. It's by Christopher Price. You can find it at your favorite bookseller. Christopher, thank you. That is CT22 for this week. CBS